Comic books are quite capable of appealing to an adult audience. In fact, the idea of comic books appealing to adults is nothing new. Since those very first comic books were reprinted newspaper comic strips, it can be said that the comic book was intended for an adult readership from the start. Newspaper strips, particularly in the 1930s, were generally more sophisticated than the watered-down fare presented in many of today's syndicated strips. They were enjoyed by an adult audience, and the logical connection was made that if adults enjoyed the daily strips, they would certainly enjoy reading compilations of their favorite strips. It wasn't until later that the content began to be geared more towards children, as I mentioned last chapter, with the new content being developed specifically for comic books. But even then, there were comics that dealt with more diverse and mature themes. Beginning in the early 1940s, a number of fact-based comics began to be produced, which dealt with a variety of themes. Believe It or Not featured true and bizarre stories from around the world, and several other comics were topically similar. Literary classics such as The Three Musketeers, Treasure Island, and Moby Dick were often reproduced in comic book form, and were not heavily edited for content or dumbed down for the benefit of children. Historical narratives were another popular topic, detailing events from significant points in history. Another genre of popular comics geared towards adults as well as children was that of movie and TV comics. Comic books were produced that were based on classic movies like Ben-Hur and Dracula, and comics based on television shows were popular throughout the 1950s. These comics often had photograph covers and adapted dozens of shows, such as I Love Lucy, The Beverly Hillbillies, and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. The comic book publisher Gold Key produced numerous comic books based on Disney and family films such as Mary Poppins and How the West Was Won. Certainly, these comic books weren't aimed solely at children. They were meant to appeal to the same audience as the movies and television shows they were based on. The adaptation of movies and television into comic books continued and can still be seen today. Dark Horse Comics in particular holds the license for publishing many movie-based comic books, and the hit television shows CSI and Alias each have a comic book adaptation. Crime comics were another source of mature material in comic books. They first appeared in 1942 with Crime Does Not Pay, and consistently increased in popularity throughout the 1950s. And nearly every comic book publishing company at one time or another produced at least one crime title. These comic books dealt with harsh subject matter, but stressed the downsides of criminal behavior. In the end, the criminals were always either apprehended or met with a more grisly fate. Despite the fact that a majority of the readers of crime comics were over 21 years old, crime comics were blamed for increased juvenile delinquency. They were branded by many as instructional manuals on how to commit crimes. Worthy of note is the fact that from 1947 to 1950, the years that the crime comics hit their peak of popularity, juvenile delinquency rates actually decreased. Crime comic books certainly had their share of child readers, but their subject matter was clearly designed to appeal to an older audience as well.